I'm going to turn the podium over to my colleague Ken Hughes, who's going to moderate this panel. And as I was giving Kent some last-minute instructions, I noticed that he was wearing a tie that has a giraffe and a rhinoceros on it. And he
Sonia, I just wanted to point out how big they are, how strong they are, and they're both vegetarians. Well, welcome. We have a terrific panel here. I know this has already been a very rich day. And now we're getting to the, I guess I can't say the meat of the program, but we're getting to what I would rename as food, finance, and fun, just to keep you going here in the last hour of the event. We have a very, as I said, distinguished panel. You have their bios, and in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you just to look at those bios, and we'll speak in the order in which you're sitting, if that's all right, gentlemen. Well, to my immediate left, and I'll just introduce the people as they're about to speak. I think it's a better way to do it. We have Mr. Andrew Kaplan, who's a professor of economics at New York University. Andrew.
Yeah, so I'm here. I'm an economist. I'm a researcher, and I'm speaking also as an unofficial health nut. I'm one of the people who kind of a while ago was watching TV, saw a program on fruit flies. That they could live, 4 times their usual life if they just sat still, and I haven't moved since. But basically, I became convinced, looking at the show, that there was something to this nutrition thing. Growing up, I grew up in England, and I grew up eating meat and potatoes, and sometimes potatoes and meat, but apart from that, there wasn't much variation in it. And decided that there might actually be something worth finding out about nutrition. Whereupon I began to realize that the problem with nutrition is the same as the problem with economics, which is that we don't have a clue. And that if you really were, let me give you the extent to which we don't have a clue. Economics, bless its heart, has the ambition of producing a complete contingent model of behavior. That is, you're supposed to be able to take an individual, change any feature of their environment, such as a tax rate, and understand what they'll do next. So a complete understanding of nutrition would have the same feature. You would be able to take a person, put them down, give them any diet, and predict how their health would be impacted. How close do you think we are? All right, so I'm going to just talk at a very high level, and let me give you what I think is I first wrote about this when being cast as the stock fascist by the New York Times. The question was, where are jobs to be found? And my answer had something to do with the fact that a lot of jobs are going to be found ultimately in industries that right now would be associated with the upper middle class to wealthy, which would be eating extremely well, for example. So what's going to happen in the story I'm telling is that there's a huge amount that we still have to learn about the food and how it impacts us. That there will be a leading edge of people willing to try anything to improve their longevity. They will seed a massive amount of research on the connection between food and health. It will be found that we can add 10 to 15 years to our lives. This is my health nut speaking. It will be found over the course of the next 50 years that we have 10 to 15 years of life in an appropriate diet. People like living longer. Even people who aren't that wealthy like living longer. It's kind of a universal desire. There will be mass markets that help people live longer. There's going to be a very long stage in which we essentially do the inverse of tobacco. So people just found out that tobacco was bad for them, maybe 50, 60 years ago. It was uncovered in a series of studies. It's taking that long to squeeze smoking out of the system. That too began as a kind of upper middle class, very fey thing to do. You know, you stop smoking. Why would you do that? Gradually, it's been realized that we all like living and we don't like coughing. So the same thing is going to happen down the food line, except it will be on the inverse side, would be my prediction. And in the meantime, lots of jobs can come about. Where can jobs come about? Well, there's a kind of information overload phenomenon where it's really hard in this world to understand how to navigate it. I mean, I have no idea what to do with my computers. They've arrived. In principle, I gather I could be listening to music wirelessly. I could be using a cell phone that actually worked. There's all kinds of things I could be doing, but nobody can translate it at this stage to me. I would pay a small amount of money to have somebody explain to me what I should be doing in this area. I would pay a great deal to have somebody explain to me what I should be doing in the area of nutrition, because I don't have a clue. And what's more, I'm convinced that most people who tell me don't have a clue. So I go in, and there's a lot of stuff that people will say about health, but I think, you don't know more than I do. Why are you telling me this? And let me tell you this, I'm extremely confident of our ignorance. I mean, I'm an economist. How could I not be confident of our ignorance? So we just don't know. I mean, it's scary. And when I hear doctors I began to know that doctors didn't know when I've had to explore illnesses and say, what do you think this is? Or what do you think that is? And how do you think that? And, why can't you just say you don't know? Why is that so hard for you to say? So I predict that the knowledge industry will be a huge part. The food knowledge industry will grow. And really what I'm arguing for is what I haven't found a good name for it yet, but I'm calling it the Food Information Health Complex. It sounds better than the military-industrial complex. And I think that it is going to be, this was in answer to the question, where are the jobs going to come from? And I have a hint. In answer to the question, where are the jobs going to come from, they're going to come from filling the needs that people have. It's called gains from trade. So you look at the markets, the places where you think there are needs that people have that haven't been met, and you think about how to fill those needs. Now, being healthy and living a long time and eating nice food, those are needs. They haven't yet been properly met. There will be a lot of jobs coming in that area. Translating the science into achievable goals is a massive opening. But how exactly that's done, I don't know. I guess what I would say is the process, how to get there. This is the usual plea for, I want everything not to be subsidized except me. And what I would like is for there to be a massive burst of, or a great deal of research that actually helps people pin down the effects of nutrition on health. We don't know in a way that makes me happy. So just the very simplest thing I saw was an AARP study with the very simplest of food diaries. And it was about 3 weeks ago. The finding was that basically the death rate was cut by about 25%. If everything else equal, you ate whole grain, high levels of whole grain. I don't know if that's so, nor does the person who wrote the study, because you'd have to do a much more careful study to know the truth. But until you've got that, how do you tell people what to do? Because otherwise it just feels like a fad that's going to go round in a circle. What will happen? It will initially be seen as a very upper class. Then we'll get to the mass market. And what you need is to find something maybe like a Walmart, although the First Lady beat me to that, or McDonald's, something like that. You want an ordinary corporation to bring this to a mass market phenomenon. That's how America works, and it works well when it does that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. David Swinson, please. Yes, this was terrific.
I'm going to call this up here really quick here, and while I'm calling this up, I'm going to send you greetings from Iowa, where we're first or second in hogs, corn, soybeans, laying hens, eggs, and of late salmonella. And the point is that being first in some things isn't necessarily all that good. I usually move around a lot, so this is going to be hard, okay? So I'm going to try to stand still. Exploring the prospects for and practical limits of local food production initiatives. Now, Iowa was smart enough many years ago, a couple of decades ago, to create the Leopold Center. They hired Fred Kirschman. They were wise again. The Leopold Center, about 5 years ago, asked me to help them out in some of the research that they were doing. It had something to do with local foods. And so I had opportunities to work with them on several projects. The kind of work that I do is applied economics to try to help people understand the value of a production gain or a loss within a region. And basically it's that vulgar thing, that economic impact stuff that we all care about. But we had to do it. And in most of the cases, we take an economy as it is, we introduce a change, and we say, what happened? What happened as a consequence of it? If we model it right, if we think about it right, can we describe what happens? And if we can describe what happens, can we use it to help us make some policies? And so I try to translate and quantify this stuff. Now, folks, I'm not a dreamer. I'm a technician, and other people dream. The dreamers come to me and they say, Dave, can you do the technical stuff? And so that's where I come from. And in so doing, but I'm mindful of a market, and I'm mindful of all of the parts and pieces and the factors of a market. And that includes history and transitions in time. So I pay attention to this from the standpoint of how does a practical applied economist think about many of these things. So my work so far is what if, not what is. And it's because the dreamers bring things to me, and they're talking about ideas that they're interested in trying to put forward. And I want to just really start here. When we think about incomes and jobs, they come about in four ways. There's only three up there, but I'll get to the last one in a second. You and I buy from one another. That's all fine and good. I get a haircut. You buy my insurance. One way or the other, we're transacting within our space. We produce more than we need. We sell the excess to somebody else, like China, or China sells to us. We get external demand to bring money into our system. We have that middle part there through savings and investments and government spending. That's the government fight between investment and business and private. I don't really care about that stuff. And we do this, which is, I get the word, local foods. We substitute some sort of local production. It doesn't have to be food, some sort of local production for something that we heretofore had imported. We keep money in the economy from going out, and it circles and cycles around. That's the economic impact argument for much of what goes to the local food. Now, the work that I've done, and I'm just going to go through this really quick. 6 years ago, I was asked to look at a situation in Iowa where they had 32 fresh fruits and vegetables, and we took all Iowans and we said, how much do you eat? And if we could produce a quarter of everything that you ate here in Iowa, a growing season, maybe a generous growing season, what would be the economic impacts? And then I did that. And then they looked at the numbers and they said, oh, Dave, we can do better than that. Let's make people eat 5 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables. And how many people here eat 5 servings? Some of you are lying. And so let's do that. Let's increase demand, therefore make my model really, really happy. Well, I called this the force feed model. You can eat it all at once, or you can put it in one sandwich. Now, but then we moved on and we started thinking about regional food systems. And up in northeast Iowa, they had a Northwest area grant, Northeast, and the whole idea there was to plan for a well region, and it involved multiple layers of planning, but one part of it was a nutrition component with a local foods component. I did some work on that. We had other regions in Iowa, southwest and southeastern Iowa, where we had multi-county food groups. They're somewhat indigenous and well organized in terms of their structure and their needs. And they wanted to know what would my economy be worth or be like if we could produce more of our fresh fruits and vegetables for ourselves. Now, these are mostly rural areas, so you already know that the demand is both scattered and relatively small. Well, in the northeast Iowa, indeed, we could produce some jobs, but I did the modeling on this. We produced, we could have them produce a lot of food and grains and processing some meat and dairy products, but at the farm level, we're only adding 55 to 60 jobs, net increasing jobs in the region. Darn farmers are just darn productive. A few farmers can produce a heck of a lot of food for a heck of a lot of people. So there's some limits to that. Southwest, Southeast Iowa, we went through the process. We described their systems. And again, yes, indeed, you can get a minor economic impact, but you're not going to get that many jobs. The job argument isn't going to carry you very far. It isn't going to carry you very far. But if productivity was relatively near dense urban demand, well, now we're talking money here. Because dense demand and you have approximate supply, we have an opportunity, which led to the next research opportunity. And I did something, it was called the Upper Midwest Study. I did it last year with the Leopold Center. It was a project with Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They had a couple of scenarios. The first scenario, I just had everybody feed their own people. You know, that's realistic. But they didn't trade and transact across borders. It was the insular approach because everybody was trying to make the case to their legislators. I gave it to them because I couldn't talk them out of it. But the second one is the one that the only reason I wanted to do this was because I wanted a situation where I thought in terms of reasonably dense urban demand and the production that would satisfy that demand. So these are my objectives. You can read them. They're very, very straightforward. I wanted a reasonable, replicable system, and I wanted to think in terms of a region with multiple production capacities, and I'll get to that in a minute. And I wanted a model that was driven, again, by dense urban demand and the production that would be there to satisfy that demand. And we all know that interface is where we have a high probability of some success. Let me do something here because I was thinking about some of the stuff that we saw today. This is the distribution of U.S. farms producing vegetables in 2007 by farm size and acres harvested. And you can see that 85% of the farms are under 50 acres. Now, if this was a democracy and those people were voting for farm policy, you'd get a certain, perhaps, result. But in terms of harvested acres, this is where the power is, the economic power. And so we have 85% of people who have small farms and they grow vegetables. They account for 7% of the harvested acres. You're trying to take on that other side over there, even though it's 11%, let's say, but they're 89, 90% of the productivity. So I just wanted to put that up there. We have distribution systems. You can see where the comparative advantages on fruits and vegetables, well, in this case it's vegetables, are in the United States. Regional concentrations, let's look at it. Here we have 15 states have 81, 82% of all vegetable acre concentration. By the way, five states have 55%. And 35 states are fighting over the next 17%. You see we have these concentrations that are immense. You cannot ignore them. You cannot ignore them. Here's my region. So here's the way I'm standardizing this on the United States, 9.3 fresh vegetable acres per 1,000 persons. And you can see my regional average is 4.6. I have 3 states that are high, 3 states like Iowa that are very low. We have the same thing with some non-citrus fruits. We're very low except for Michigan, which grows a lot of apples and cherries, and I know by personal experience there is only so many apples you can eat. So we're in a deficit there. So the idea of a local production and economic gain is fitting in quite well. By the way, I wanted to put this up here. This is all the cropland in the United States per capita. It's a little over an acre and something per us. Vegetables, 2 100ths, orchards, 3 100ths, the rest of that stuff. So when people argue about the local foods or horticulture or anything eating into the food producing capacity of the United States, there's a lot of green there. I don't believe they're afraid. Now that's forage and hay and things like that, but still, I just wanted to put that up there. All righty, here's my candidate crops. I had 28 crops that we could produce that we weren't already producing in excess. We have these crops. We're going to run them through these systems. I made 6 models, all specific to the specific states. I adjusted those models to be as good as I could make them. I had my dense metropolitan areas. I disregard state boundaries because they're silly and nobody cares about them except petty politicians. And we allowed demand from nearby bordering areas. I allowed there to be a market. I thought in terms of propensity to produce small farmers. I had a weighting system between cropland and small farms. I took into account the disincentive of distance, travel costs. and county level estimates that can be sent back to the state level. So this was designed to give people a realistic scenario and to help them understand what some of the capacity to produce for some of the regions were. I factored in distance. This is just an illustration of a distance decay kind of a function, that at some distance we can't do something. The farther the distance gets, the lower the probability. And the reason we can't do that is because transportation costs. And in this case, you know, somebody owns 50 acres, they're driving a straight truck or a small truck. This is going to be indicative of the kind of costs that they're going to have. So we have to think in terms of these kinds of things. So I get my expected acres. And it's weighted by my formula, but I get my expected acres. I look at all of my communities, 35 million metropolitan areas with dense demand, and we identify the kind of counties and where the counties are that could be producing. And you can see my state of Iowa there really only has medium demand. Between 250 to 999 acres is all that it would need to produce. But as we get closer to these denser areas, we create the possibility, the probability, if not the profitability of that kind of production. So that's what this is. And by the way, you can see up here too, we have areas that it's not profitable to produce because you're just too far away. Now I set a distance threshold on that, but I was doing everybody a favor by setting a distance threshold. So we get this thing. Now, I get 195,000 acres is required to do all of this production, to produce all these fruits and vegetables for these people. It's something more than about 30% of their demand of these many fruits and vegetables. $637 million are at the farm level. That's a lot of farm sales. That's a good thing. And in my case, I was much more interested in identifying how many counties would be good candidates for programming in my extension services, in my state government programming and planning services. Where would I want to target the kind of services that I have at the local level? And by the way, I said we had 195,000 acres would be required to produce that. That's 4/5 of one Iowa county could produce all the fruits and vegetables for those 35 million people. 4/5, 15 by 15 miles. Run it through the economic impact model, and mine's a good model, and we get, look at the last two numbers. 6,694 jobs, one way or the other associated with the ag productivity that came out of this, either by farming, by inputs, or by everybody respending their money in the system. $284 million worth of labor income, a lot of money, it's a big deal. We took that land away from the corn and soybean farmers, so I have to take that away. We have to take their productivity off of that land. They would have used a total of 1,800 jobs and $42 million of labor income to have that land in production. So when I net it out, I get about 4,000 more jobs. So that's the economic impact thing. Now, folks, that's it. That's way high. That's 30%. 30%, and that many jobs across that many states. So we have limits to the job creation, and I want people to understand that there are limits to the job creation. They're knowable. We can describe them quite well, and when we talk about job gains from it, we need to be mindful of that. Okay, let's go to policy and planning questions, as I want to run through this really quick. On the local food and regional capacity to produce, what is the local and regional demand? I have several regions where the native demand is not strong enough to really support a very strong initiative. Even though they have an incredible amount of affection for it, it's not going to produce very many jobs. If the capacity has waned over time, why did it? I have presided over the decline of much of the Midwest and the Great Plains as a regional scientist for the last 25 years. And I know why a lot of that has waned. People have left. People have left. There's been a tremendous transformation. Moving beyond rhetoric, how much of the impetus of local foods encouragement is practical? Now, when practical, I'm talking in economics terms. Can we do this? Can we make a profit? Can we do this the right way? Can we organize in ways that sustain this kind of a movement? What are the impediments? We know about this. Where can it be more profitable and successful? I'm arguing this urban fringe interface is a place we need to pay attention to. Is this worthy of public underwriting? In my world, unless you can identify a clear market failure, I'm going to argue back that I don't know that the government has a role in this, and so we need to think about this. And if we're better off locally or regionally, then prove it. Prove it. across every single category. Prove it, quantify it, make your case, not as concepts, as constructs. And it's very, very important. I want to end up last here. We have a market. These deficits in fresh fruit and vegetable production in many of the states do not presuppose market failures. I already said that. And I want to make sure that it's very, very clear. The market failures, if there are market failures, somebody talked about Tyson, other people talk about externalities. We need to deal with them and talk about them, but in and of themselves, the local foods issue, the comparative deficit, is not necessarily a consequence of those things, nor do they presuppose a lack of will or some sort of deficiency in agricultural producers. These are slow-moving evolutions. I grew up in Dewey County, South Dakota. There's nothing up there, folks. There's no local food. There's never going to be a local food up there. And it's a tough and rough place to live. I mean that. The fundamentals of economics, goodness, we can't ignore those. Land productivity, comparative advantages, climate, what can and cannot be grown, settlement patterns, market fundamentals, investment in infrastructure, they can't be altered or manipulated in the short run. So if there's a change to occur, it's a very slow change in my view. And then gains to local food production, should they occur, will reveal themselves in profitable margins in certain kinds of areas, much of which is associated with urbanization and population settlement patterns. And again, unless somebody can identify and substantiate those market failures, those profitable margins, if we try to manufacture them socially, they're going to have high social costs, and I worry about that. And that is my presentation very rapidly.
Well, so far it sounds like we're going to be healthy but out of work. Let me turn now to Stephen Vogel.
All right. I don't know, man. Let me get out of here. Let's see, where's that mouse? There we go. And it blows up. Okay. And let me click that in. All right. I work for the Economic Research Service, and my talk really is going to be about more on what we see on the ground, and I'm going to look at it in a national scope. And so I want to cover geographic distribution of local food sales at the national level. I want to look at the volume of local food sales, and again, it's much larger than you think. And I want to talk about the farmer. So we're going to look at participation of local food sales by farm size, and this is important, and the viability of small and medium-sized farms. Not necessarily saying profitability, but the viability. Okay, first, here we have a map of farmers' direct-to-consumer sales by county and based on the county of residence of the farmer. As you can see, the volume of direct-to-consumer sales are highest in the Northeast and in the West Coast, and in some metropolitan regions spread through across the United States. Part of this is probably attributed to the fact that these regions grow more fruits and vegetables, and that's driven by climate, topography, and infrastructure. And this is based on the 2007 census, so you can see where your county is. You can see the North Dakota county. There ain't much. Okay. Now, annually, the Agricultural Resource Management Survey queries about 22,000 farmers on their farm operation and their farm household characteristics. The 2008 survey was the first survey to specify which marketing channel you used when you marketed local food, when you sold local food. And in 2008, farmers reported that they sold $4.8 billion of local food, and this number is 4 times what previous ARMS estimates and census estimates give you. So this is very large. It's very important. It means the sector is much bigger. Okay, and in order to see why this is the case, we take the marketing channels and divide them into 2 groups. The first is our traditional direct-to-consumer outlets. Okay, and here you see farmers markets, roadside stands, farm stores, and CSA's, community-supported agriculture. Farmers who sold directly or exclusively through these outlets generated about $900 million. The other type of outlets we have selling local foods are what we call intermediated marketing channels. These are channels in which the farmer sells to an aggregator, sells to a restaurant, or a grocer. And in turn, they sell this food locally to the consumer. Farmers who sell through these channels exclusively generated $2.7 billion. Okay, and lastly, we have a group of farmers who simultaneously sell in one of the direct-to-consumer outlets and also through one of the intermediated marketing channel outlets. And they sold $1.2 billion. We can't disaggregate this further because the sample is small, and the way it was designed, it wouldn't permit me to go beneath that. Okay. Now, when we look at farms, okay, 107,000 farms reported using at least one of these marketing channels. Now, these farms are interesting. It excludes point farms, i.e. farms that have sales less than $1,000. These farms, their mean share, or let me put it this way, the share of local food sales out of total farm sales is 60 to 80%. So these farms sell locally, and that's the objective of what they do. I grouped these farms into three categories: small, medium, and large. You can see it there, $50,000 less for small farms, gross sales of $50,000 to $249,000 for a medium-sized local foods farm, and a large local food farm has sales of $250,000 or more. Now, my colleague Sarah Lowe said, well, gee, if you're a grain farmer in Iowa and you sell $300,000 in gross sales, you're hardly making it. So local food farms, their scales might not be the same as the big grain farms in Iowa. Okay, what we observe is that the small local food farms represent 81% of all local food farms, and yet they only generate 11% of total sales. And this is interesting because the small farm is the public face of the local food farmer, but their sales footprint is small. The medium farms, as you can see, represent 14% of all local food farms, and yet they generate 19% of all the sales. So the really big actors here is that 5% of local food farms that generate 70% of local food farms or local food sales. Okay, when we want to look at what channels farmers are most likely to use, the first thing we note is that 3 out of 4 small local food farms sell exclusively through direct-to-consumer outlets, and this is the public face. On average, they earn about $8,000 in local food sales per farm. On the other hand, the medium-sized farm, their farm participation rate or usage rate of the different marketing channels is really concentrated in these two. So about half use direct-to-consumer outlets exclusively, and the other half will sell simultaneously in a direct-to-consumer outlet like a food store or a farmer's market, at the same time selling to a grocer. And lastly, the large local food sales farms, their participation is sort of equally spread across all three types of options in terms of how you're going to market your local food. However, their average local food sales per farm is about $750,000. And the really big local food farms who sell exclusively through the intermediated marketing channels, I buy Eastern Shore apples, they generate almost $2 million in sales per farm. Okay, now the next slide here, the next two slides, I kind of want to address this issue of is the local food farm different than the average farm of the same farm sales class size? And the reason for this is I want to know, why is there so much attention placed on small and medium-sized farms? Is there a reason for it? Because I see this kind of industrious cacophony going on. And so this is what I look. The first is I want to measure what is the operator full work time commitment to running the farm. Okay. So, and you measure full-time, and this is expressed as a full-time job equivalent, operator full-time job equivalent, which is 2,000 hours annually. And the first thing to notice is that the operator of the local food farm across all income sales class sizes devotes about 60% more work time to running the farm than does the operator of a farm not so engaged. So for example, for farms earning less than $50,000, the operator of a local food farm devotes one full-time job to running that farm. He's not a hobby farmer. The operator may be who devotes only half the time for the other of the farm not so engaged might be a hobby farmer. But we have more labor time commitment on the part of a local food farm. For larger class sizes, it is likely that other members of the local food farm household are also engaged as operators. So it takes more than one person. Oops, there we go. Okay, this next slide. This next slide, I want to look at how viable are small and medium-sized farms. Okay, and this is an important question because most small and medium-sized farms are not going to earn a profit. Okay, and the ability to earn a profit rises as the size of farm increases. Okay, so I'm looking at instead what's a financial efficiency measure, or which is an operating expense ratio. And this is basically an index measure of whether you can recover your variable costs with incoming gross sales. And for those farms in which their cash expenses are just met with sales, their index measure is 100. So that would be like, okay, I can keep going the next day. I still have to work off the farm to pay off loans, pay off debt, and maybe pay off my fixed expenses. For farmers earning less than $10,000 in gross sales, they have a bloody difficult time to actually make ends meet, to actually recover their variable cost. To give you an idea of how difficult it is, for every $1 in sales that they generate, they incur $2 to $3 of cash expenses. So if you were to look at that scale, you would have to double it to see where their bars would be. That's how difficult it is for the 10,000, for what we call the non-commercial farm at ERS. So we have this $10,000 threshold in gross sales. And then we begin to see where farmers the operations begin to see better financial footing. And what we can say when we look at this graph is that it appears that the local food farm in the red appears to be slightly, maybe they manage their farm operation a little more efficiently. I'm not saying they're profit. This isn't a measure of profitability. But as farm size increases, the gap increases. And as farm size increases, you are edging towards greater degree of, perhaps you will enter that range of positive profits. In the average U.S. farm, they begin earning positive profits at the gross sales point of $175,000. What I need to explore further, but what I think this figure suggests, is that the local food farm may reach that positive profit gross sales point at a much lower gross sales point. So, and that's what that one says. So what do we know? Okay, we know that local food sales are geographically concentrated near large population centers, and I think Dave gave quite a stark demonstration of that, particularly for those folks who envision having local food sales markets across the country. We also know that the volume of local food sales is larger than previously estimated, and I'm just now building into future data, our future ARM surveys, questions on institutional sales. So we don't even have that. Now, this is important in the sense that I guess I received a compliment recently in the sense that an economist at ERS, a lot of them work on traditional agriculture, big systems agriculture, and they come in and they go, wow, your local foods is a niche market. And that's different because 3 years ago it would be a fad. So we're beginning to see a recognition that it's there. And this happened with organics. We have quite an advanced research program in organic production, but it started 10 years ago trying to develop data for this market. Okay. The next thing is small local food farms are the most numerous, but the larger local food farms are generating the most sales. There's at Tacoma Park farmers market that I go to and buy apples. There's a guy who trucks in his food from Pennsylvania. He has three young kids working with him. And the amazing thing is I sat there one time, he must sell $5,000, $6,000 every Sunday. So he's making a lot of money. You don't have to be a big farm to make a lot of revenue. I don't know whether he's turning a profit. I think he is because I don't know his cost structure. But the volume is there. And then lastly, above the $10,000 sales threshold, local food farms may appear to be more financially sound than farms not so engaged.
Could you stay near the microphone because the people with the webcast won't be able to hear you?
Oh, sorry. Well, that's it.
Thank you. Let me turn to Gary Madison.
I can't talk.
You can talk for a while because it's going to take me a minute. Anything else you want to say to the crowd while I'm busy?
Well, now we get to the finance part. That's always
He's
serious.
going to have a present. I'm going to slide back over. I'm going to take his chair. We'll both
Okay, I work for the Farm Credit System, the trade organization here in D.C. of the Farm Credit System. How many of you are familiar with Farm Credit? Okay, reasonable market penetration here. We're a cooperative of cooperatives. We're like a credit union for farmers. We were chartered by this fellow named Woodrow Wilson 4 years after he chartered 4 years after he chartered the Federal Reserve System. We were chartered originally in the exact same territories. Initially, this is the history lesson. I feel like I have to give a little bit because Woodrow worked so hard on this. It was part of a crisis at the time in 1916 that farmers couldn't get more than a one-year mortgage in many areas of the country. So if you had a bad crop, you lost your farm. That's what that meant. So the Farm Credit System was chartered by the federal government, as was the Federal Reserve System. We're now still, our ultimate board of directors is still that bunch of folks that's mostly here in town called Congress. But none of the money that we have, that we use, that we have in reserves is federal money. We operate entirely on our members' money, again, like a credit union. So we're capitalized by our borrowers plus retained earnings, and that's the source of the funds, or that's the source of the backing. What we do is sell bonds on Wall Street, take that money, loan it to farmers. They pay the money back, we pay the bonds back. Seems to work, gives me a job. My title, not that I'm hung up on my title, but you see young beginning small farmers in there. I refer to it as YBS farmers. And that's an acronym that I was stuck with when I got the job. I want you to understand that. YBS, I don't know. But maybe you'll think it's appropriate after I finish talking. Just to describe the setting here for what we are again, set up by Congress. We have an independent regulator like FDIC for commercial banks. We have our own regulator. There are 84 independently run farm credit associations. That's the retail lending arm. You walk into an office, meaning that. Around the country, they all have a farmer-elected board of directors. And we are, all of those folks, those 84 independent institutions are cooperate together to form this farm credit system. They have limited connection to each other than we get our money from the same place. One of the ways that we measure how we do relative to lending to young beginning small, young being 35 years or younger, beginning 10 years or fewer in management, and small being $250,000 in gross sales or less per year, is counting up what we do each year in new loans each year. If you went back to 2007, we would have done approximately 10 times as much lending as USDA to beginning farmers. So there's a scale difference here that we're kind of like that quiet company. We don't brag about it. We're not seen as this huge source necessarily, other than by people who are in agriculture and look for us because they know that we're there. I won't talk about any of this. There's specific requirements, because we're chartered by Congress, for us to serve the needs of those young beginning small farmers. And these are some of the ways that we do it. I kind of hope that these slides are available to people after this session. These will be online somewhere.
Yes,
is that
we
right?
can put them on
Okay.
our website. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I really want, that's the end of the farm credit. That's what farm credit is, part of this. What I really want to talk about is a subject called retail agriculture. And I'm going to talk about it, and then I'll eventually get around to defining it. Because I want to leave it nebulous for a minute here. This used to be alternative agriculture. It's now what Stephen was just telling us. There's really something there. You got $4 billion. I'm going to use a figure bigger than that because it's so nebulous about all this money and trying to measure it that we don't make up. You make up numbers. No, I make up numbers. You have to cite them. But the important thing is that it is very popular, economically significant, and unconfined as to region. Now, one of my strategies in PowerPoints is to use very small type, so you can't really see what's going on, and I get to say whatever I want about the slide. This is direct-to-consumer sales. Fifth one down. If direct-to-consumer sales were a commodity, as opposed to cattle and calves, grains and oilseeds, if it were a commodity and we called it a thing, it would be the fifth largest thing in American agriculture. But we don't call it a thing. It's not cows. It's not corn. We separate this traditionally in different ways. But if we look at it as a thing, a sector, all of a sudden it gets pretty big, like Steve was saying. It is economically significant. I added organic, direct, and local, and these are NAS statistics also. If you add them together, you get something that is more than the value of cotton and rice that's produced in the country. This is significant. The problem that we have, that I argue in front of most audiences, is that we need more raw information for Steve and ERS to be able to work with, because it's still very hard to count this kind of thing. Now, as an aside, as a lender, if you think about the farmers market sector, just as a for instance, that's a cash environment. It's not necessarily reported income. It doesn't necessarily show up in your earnings statement or your balance sheet, which is what a lender looks at when they go to make a loan to somebody. It's a difficult environment for the counting of it, for more than just the fact of its bulk overall. At the farm level, it's a difficult environment because there's a lot of unreported income. Not that farmers would ever. Actually, farmers, I was with a loan officer of many years of experience a few weeks ago giving a talk, and he said he is quite sure that farmers don't farm to grow food to feed the masses. Farmers are in business to avoid taxes. That's their main. So here's another slide that's too small for you to read, and I've highlighted some of it so it's even harder to read. But this is one that you really should look at online once these are posted, because this is, first of all, it's an illustration. Steve is constrained by actually having to report facts. I get to make them up. So this is an illustration based on several farm business consultants and I having a few beers. And if you look at, we're talking about three different ways to operate the same 100-acre business, different acreages in production, wholesale, retail in small amounts, or CSAs and shares. Jump down to the bottom most unreadable part called net margin, and you'll see the net margin for a wholesale vegetable operation is somewhere around 4%, for a retail farm market at 10%, and for a CSA at 20%. One of the reasons why there's that extra jump that Steve had in his slides on that income is basically a higher net income from doing retail, agriculture, natured sorts of businesses. You're in a marketplace where there's a higher margin. You can earn money faster on lower sales. So it's no surprise that local food selling farms have smaller sales. And I do have numbers of what, if just quickly to put across some numbers on here. If you took a 750 share CSA and it were 600 shares or 750 shares, you're talking about a net income of about $90,000 a year. With the retail farm market selling about $1 million worth of retail farm market a year, that's $25 per visit, 4 visits per customer. You get a net margin, you earn $100,000 a year. And the poor guy over here at the wholesale vegetable generally is earning about $8,000 at that margin. Life is not good in that particular business, but that's why that kind of farm would typically be a lot bigger if you're going to make a living at it. Okay, so it's not just popular and economically significant. It is everywhere. This is where CSA operations are, and the important thing here is that they're in 88 or 80, almost 89% of counties in the U.S. You can see that it's a coastal phenomenon as far as concentration, but the important thing is it really is everywhere. There's between 1 and 10 farms in 2,086 counties in the country. Looking at, the little dots are metro counties, and this is, okay, so where do beginning farmers start now, or in 2007? Where did they start? Well, there's a heck of a concentration around metro counties. Beginning farmers, I mean, you can see where I'm going with this. Beginning farmers are starting in local food-based businesses or retail agriculture-based businesses much more commonly than they are in, look out in North and South Dakota. Now, part of the reason is there aren't people out there to buy the local food products to a large degree, although there are successful farmers markets in those states. But the cost of entry into a commodity-type farm, of course, is a lot higher capital investment. You can get started with fewer dollars and get a higher margin, so you're earning closer to a return for your effort if you're in a local food business. Okay, so all this I'm calling retail agriculture, the farmer's market, the direct-to-retail sales, the agritainment, the CSA. If you're a beef grower, grass-fed beef grower, and you're wholesaling it through an aggregator, but you know that you're identity preserving that grass-fed beef and you know it's going to a customer, I'm calling that retail agriculture too. What I'm suggesting is that retail agriculture is a necessary term for the debate or the discussion that we're having here, the debate with the rest of the world, because we have to call it something. Small business has this term called small business, right? When I was a farmer, I was a small businessman. I fit in that. I had my wife and my slave-based kids working for me, and it was a small business, just like up to 500 people in what would look a lot like a factory, which looks like a big business, is a small business also, as far as being encompassed in that term. We need such a term to include this polyglot of activity that I'm calling retail agriculture to help us in the policy debates, because it's something now. It's something economically, and we've got to call it something, because by the time we get, how many times have you heard somebody say, well, CSA means community-supported agriculture? We've got to get over that. We need a term that everybody can understand quickly and easily. So here are the characteristics of this, and you've been reading this while I've been talking, so I'm going to skip ahead. And here's some more. This gaining efficiency, Steve again mentioned this. If you layer, for each new layer of retail-based activity or retail agriculture that you add to a farm, you're adding about $9,000 in net income to the farm. So if you have a CSA and you add agritainment, you should, on average, you're going to get another $9,000 in net income. The layering of those businesses is what makes them persistent and what makes them able to be pursued by the farmers that are entering those kinds of businesses. If we're going to get more of those, if we're going to get more businesses in direct-to-consumer markets, we're going to have to add farms, because this doesn't really work. Despite the large productivity of the large farms, new farmers are created in order to build capacity in a lot of places. Think the Northeast. There isn't the possibility of large farms anymore. You have to add a lot of small new farms in order to grow capacity. That's a problem for saying that we're going to grow the local food capacity in a certain area. There's certain areas where it's tough because it's hard to fit between the buildings and find some farmland. So what's this mean for young beginning small farmers? That's what I'm worried about when I speak to young farmer audiences. They kind of shrug their shoulders. Well, yeah, I'm in business and I'm trying real hard and I'm going to be a success and I know I'm going to make it. But what's it mean? What it means is they're going to have off-farm jobs. 84% of farms now have more off-farm than on-farm income. What I try to tell young farmers now is that they need to think of themselves as rural entrepreneurs. They are businessmen. They have to learn how to do those things of business because they're likely to have 4 or 5 in their lifetime, and it's highly likely that the one that's an off-farm business is going to be their most profitable one. Now, if you take all of this, and I'm saying that this is true for both local food, retail, agriculture type businesses as well as conventional agriculture, and I'm going to step aside here to conventional agriculture for a minute to make this point. It works for them too. The importance of agriculture, of farmers in rural communities is going to increase. They're stuck there, okay? They've got roots, literal and figurative. They are going to be the rural entrepreneurs that own the dry cleaners on Main Street or the car dealership and the back 42. That's the nature of that rural entrepreneurship that young people are entering into now. And that's about all I have to say about that. I'm looking forward to questions.
Is the lady there? We'll turn to questions, and we've got, we'll take a few extra minutes.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rodman. I'm a researcher at Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, and we're situated in the School of Public Health at Hopkins. I have a couple of comments for Andrew Kaplan. One was about your comparison to the tobacco industry. Several people have compared food to the tobacco industry, but just not in the reverse sense that you posed it in. Big Food has been compared to tobacco for many reasons, one of which is their framing of the consumption of their products and the health effects that ensue due to that consumption as a matter of complete personal responsibility. So I'm just wondering why it is that you reversed the comparison. I would certainly like to see this comparison made more often, but directly. I'm concerned with people increasing their knowledge about what's good for them, and I'm concerned about, as you said, increasing research about what nutrition actually means. But I'm equally, if not more, concerned with the fact that the people who really have power over what is available to most Americans have huge political and economic backing that the everyday person can't fight. And my second comment is about the food knowledge industry that you're talking about. Of course, job creation, especially today, is extremely important. But I find it absurd that the future guardians of our food knowledge as it relates to health would not be the very people that we charge with the protection of our health. I work at Hopkins. I have several friends that are internal medicine residents, and we don't know enough, but we do know some things, and what we do know, they certainly don't know. And I can tell you they have some of the most appalling diets of anyone that I know. And obesity, as you know, as economists, is an extremely profitable industry for some, and our internal medicine residents and our doctors in general, rather than knowing information about what would prevent illness, as I wish would happen, are actually just very good at prescribing pills to treat obesity and diet-related diseases. And in that sense, they're almost stewards of an industry that has absolute antithesis of interest in improving our health. So I wonder if you can just speak to that from an economic sense.
I guess I am not, I prefer kind of starting with something that is, rather than what I find a little strange about that, which is it kind of feels like almost pure morality coming at me. Let's talk, so why did I say the way I said it? Basically, I grew up in England. Now, we're not going to blame the same companies for the English diet that we're going to blame for the American diet, unless they were somehow reaching back in time and grabbing me back then. The way I see it, we don't understand, even most of us today, including the doctors, the actual connection between diet and health is largely a mystery. One of the reasons that so many people stick to really bad diets is the line that I used to be able to use with myself, which is first they say one thing, then they say another. One day an egg is bad for you, the other day is, I'll just give it up. Now, what I mean by the reverse of tobacco is that tobacco was a method of shortening your otherwise ordinary lifespan. So what do I think about food? I think we're all incredibly ignorant to start with. I didn't know anything about nutrition growing up. When I did have some episodes of putting weight on, I had no idea which of my foods could be responsible. I had absolutely no idea what a calorie was. I just ate. And it tasted good, and I kind of didn't understand. I was kind of a machine that tastes nice. And it takes a long time to get to a different viewpoint, which is, well, maybe this is really interacting with my health. And my own sense from looking at everything I see is that by deliberately interfering with our health, that is, by blocking our instincts, we can live longer and healthier than past generations. So that's what I try to convey. And it literally, but I don't think I know. So I feel I do the usual stuff. I mean, I have kids, I kind of flail around trying to make them eat healthy stuff. But the stories are a little bit, well, eat your broccoli. Why? Now, as a scientist, I know I couldn't really produce a very good study yet. I just know I couldn't. And so that disturbs me. And I would like to be able to produce that story and have somebody convey it.
Any of you other gentlemen have a comment on nutrition or advertising? Or?
As a non-expert, maybe one of the opportunities for employment, job employment, is to be the other side of the double-blind test. Because that's what we suffer from with nutrition, is we can't do that. I mean, pet foods are really good because in the past we've been able to do that. A double-blind test and good dogs, bad dogs, live dogs, dead dogs. We can't do it with people, and so this is going to remain a mystery. The health claims that come out of, we found out that oatmeal does this for you or that for you, are largely based on correlative observations rather than causation observations, and that's the problem. We can't do double-blind tests on people, unless it's a job opportunity that you see in the future that I'm sure.
Sonia, from the gentleman there in the middle.
I wonder if David and Stephen and Gary could talk to each other a little bit. I mean, I'm not an economist, so I'm not sure if I got it all right. And you all went very fast and had lots of information, most of which, as Gary realized, couldn't be read. But it seems to me that Gary ended up in a more optimistic place, whereas David is, as I understand it, you're pessimistic about the economic potential of local farming, I think. And Stephen, I think, is also sort of putting out information that suggests that it's not that profitable. So are you looking at different data? Are you interpreting it differently? Is it because you're in the Midwest and you're in Washington? I mean, explain yourselves.
I can real quick. Yeah. Right arm. No, in my case, it's not so much that I'm pessimistic that local foods won't make money. I'm pessimistic that local foods will make money in many places. And what I'm wanting to have people understand is that I don't need a state policy in Iowa that is encouraging local foods development, unmindful of the fact that many people who might be enticed to try to do this aren't going to make a living. I need good policy, good education, programming, and I need the right kind of numbers going to legislators that says, if we're going to try to promote this, we're promoting small farm. 25 years ago, I worked in the Department of Ag at Iowa, and we're promoting small farmers. Guess what? We got fewer small farmers. We got more big farmers. We got more old farmers. We're just failing miserably. But we keep trying. But we want good policies that are trying to promote the right things. And then second, I'm really ornery about this. Public money is special money, and you're not necessarily any more special than anybody else. So if you're going to be making the case for something, let's use good research, good science, good economics, and good geography, so that we can describe where something is likely to be a success. Then we have a program that's talking about winners, and you get good outcomes at USDA at survey time.
All right. Well, in this case, some of my work was actually sprung from conversations with Gary. And I actually thought that what I presented was really fairly optimistic given the state of local foods. Now, if we go back and look at ethanol, and some people still consider ethanol production a boondoggle, but way back in the 70s, when I think it was called synfuel, I forget, there was
Gasohol.
Gasohol. Okay, the point is that whether it's totally done by the private sector or there's public sector assistance in certain parts, you know, you reach economies of scale where all of a sudden it becomes something I look at, as opposed to, okay, that's a fad. And I think we might be getting closer to, is this an infant industry? I don't know. You know, I see a lot, I have the luxury of looking at the question, what farmers say they do. So I can avoid this tremendous debate that goes on about how should I scale it, what does it matter, who's wrong, who's right. But farmers are involved. And so when I look at it, it's like, okay, I see something that's bigger than it used to be. That to me is something. I don't know. I think future data collection efforts will have to be more refined so that I can get at this phenomenon more clearly. But also it's going to grow. I don't know. There's some other things that are going on in the macroeconomy that I think may open an avenue for this, and that is that we have large macro and international imbalances such that it's fairly common knowledge that the real standard of living of households in this country is going to either decline or slow down its growth relative to the rest of the world. And it might be that really extremely cheap global supply chains will no longer be as cost effective because the terms of trade will shift. I don't know that answer either. I don't think we're going to know that answer for another 5 years. But it's interesting to see so much more endeavor going into this. In the early 70s, I dropped out of university for 2 years to work in a food co-op that was linked to 2 organic farms and a restaurant. And so it's like, okay, back then I knew it was a fad. I couldn't make a living at it, and I worked hard, and I wasn't going to be a slave to the earth. And I apologize to those of you who enjoy working in the land. But it was bloody hard. There wasn't the technological implements to make it easier. And so I'm caught surprised by the energy, and it's pretty interesting to watch. I like Gary's conceptualization of it as retail agriculture. I think when we look at it, we tend to look at it crop specific, and then it's harder to really get a grasp of what we're seeing, and because we want to compartmentalize it. So that's where I come in.
Well, as a former young beginning small farmer, I get to, and now with a lending organization, the economists are sort of like the post-mortem of the loans that we made 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And the lender has to be out there in front with the customer. We're owned by our customers. When our customers come in, and this really is a youthful phenomenon here that we're talking about. When our customers' kids come in and they want to go back to the family farm, and Dad tells them it's not big enough, and this is from a real example. Dad says the farm isn't big enough because your older brother and I have identified that our corn, soybean, and hog operation is it's giving us the maximum return for 2 families. We're really good managers. We know it's not going to produce enough for you, but we'll give you and your young wife 2 acres on the corner of the farm that's closest to town, and those 2 youngest farmers in the family opened a retail greenhouse business and started selling bedding plants. After a couple of years, people came to the farm. They said, well, can we buy some of the pork because you produce thousands of head of pork and sell it through the wholesale market because it's a big corn, soybean integrated operation. In the 5th year of operation of that greenhouse business, that provided 90% of the net profit for the farm because the wholesale pork business was losing $30 a head every pig that went out of there. That, excuse me, this is from a lender's point of view, this is called risk mitigation. This is finding different marketing channels for the exact same product and finding somebody who, snicker, will pay you more for it. It's a great way to do business. But it's what youthful, young beginning small farmers are doing as they enter agriculture. It's what I was talking about, them being rural entrepreneurs. The lifespan of a successful enterprise in farming is going to get compressed. You're going to have to find new products. You're going to have to be an innovator across the course of your farming career, which statistically, I have to get this dig in, as farmers get older, I want to just put a little bit of lid on that, if I could. Farmers are getting older because there are more old farmers entering farming, not because there are fewer young farmers entering farming. Okay, there are twice as many beginning farmers over age 55 as there are under age 35. So every time you add older farmers, you raise the age. Well, it's not a crisis. Things aren't that bad. We just have a lot of experienced people that come to the country with capital and ambition and a desire for a better lifestyle, and they're these folks selling us local food that are in very small operations that just happen to be profitable at a very small size because they're really good managers because they know what they're doing. Now, that's my broad brush of what's going on with that kind of demographic.
The gentleman with the striped shirt, and then back there, and then over here.
I've seen some data from USDA 2008 survey. That
you can please identify yourself?
Yes, Rafi from Yale Dining, Rafi Tahirian from Yale Dining. So, and it was similar from the same source of data that Stephen was showing actually in his presentation, that farmers that they do generate less than $10,000 per year per their farm. They typically supported by a spouse that is in professional and makes significantly more money than what farm actually shows there. Now, a lot of people can look at that data and say, well, then that farm is actually a tax loophole for the professional person. And so that $10,000 really not really an entrepreneur type of work. This is basically one becomes farm operator, and a vehicle becomes tax deductible, and everything else. The gas becomes tax deductible, and everything else. So how would you react to that?
Go ahead, Gary. I'm not really the farm finance person, so my inclination is you can't keep running losses with IRS over, 2-3 years, and then you can't deduct that from your income. And I know enough, some of the demographics, a lot of these farmers don't make that much money off the farm. So I don't know why they do it. Peggy Hill, a sociologist in the 90s, wrote a paper, and she queried, why are you farming if you're losing money and you're working off the farm also? And for them, it was a lifestyle choice. So you've heard this phrase, maybe it was done in the 90s, about you're farming the rural lifestyle. That might be true. The interesting thing is that there have been about 2 million farms, I don't know, for 30 years maybe, and they persist. Small farms persist. Okay, I make no attempt to try and understand that. Small farms have actually increased in size in terms of the numbers. There's been kind of a winnowing out of what we call the disappearing middle. But I don't know why someone goes out and loses money and farms. It's not something I would do, but I enjoy the fruits of local food labor. So I don't know, Go ahead.
Let's take the last two questions, and if you could both make them brief, because I realize this is so interesting, I've gotten lost in the agriculture myself here.
Okay. Well, I'm Kathy Ozer, and I work with the National Family Farm Coalition, and have been working on these issues also for a long time. And I will try and be really brief, but I wanted to say a couple points. One is, I know there's this distinction being made between viability and profitability, and that is kind of implying that it's an assumption that people should be working these multiple jobs, which really gets to this question of what can we do to have a food system that pays farmers fairly at the farm, pays others in the food system fairly all the way through the chain, and not creating this dynamic, which for the 20 years I've worked on these issues, it's been this challenge of making the distinction between gross and net and what really is happening on the farm and in the community. And so I just kind of think that question of what do we do to return profitability to farming, regardless of, particularly for small to medium-sized farms, and ways to approach it. And then I guess the other comment I just want to make, and I know it was kind of a joke in terms of this issue of non-reporting, is that in terms of people not reporting possibly sales at markets, is that actually the need for people to be reporting their income is really important in terms of participation in all of the various farm programs. And so looking forward, trying to figure out ways to engage all types of production in both the farm programs and the different, when we have a disaster, and getting disaster assistance, just how important it is to build those systems in. And then I guess the one other question I would have is, in the data that was given, which I thought was really interesting, is were there breakouts looking at race and gender in terms of who's farming? And then my last comment is, we all talk in acronyms in Washington, and I think actually one of the acronyms we shouldn't use is CSA, and we should say community-supported agriculture or community-supported fisheries, because I think that does really tell what the nature of those operations are. So, sorry if that was a little long-winded.
Well, let's take the gentleman over there with the last question, then we'll give the panel a chance to respond to the two questions, maybe make a very brief final remark.
Okay, I'll make it quick. My name is Ralph Laglisi. I too am from the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, which is based at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. I have a quick question regarding economics, and I think one thing that I've always noticed is we keep talking about profitability and capitalism, supposedly. And from what my very loose understanding of economics, Adam Smith capitalism was based on agrarian society, where actually the money went back into the community, and everything was based on the money going back into the local community. Can you guys talk about that now with this global economy? It seems that economics doesn't necessarily work, at least the capitalism that was based on Adam Smith, and we know it's changed. But if you can talk about what's going on there, if the money doesn't go back into the community where the money is being taken out, what's going on? How do we fix that?
Thank you. Gentlemen, who'd like to tackle one or the other of these questions or make a final remark?
Can I do the economics one?
He's got to defend England, too.
No, it's not. They're kind of among people who, and I don't want to directly insult you, but I will insult genre. Among people who don't know economics well, it's about money. Among people who know economics well, it's about gains from trade. Gains from trade can take place at any level. It's when somebody has something that somebody else is willing to pay more for because for some reason it generates something for them. So it really is fairly, and the word capitalism in essence is taken from it makes no sense to call something capitalism. It's got to do with the idea that there's something good or bad about the ability to raise private capital to start a company. It's the wackiest definition. I have no idea why it's out there. People really think there's something called no capitalism and capitalism. Well, if there's no capitalism, it means you have a good idea, you can't get financing for it because you can't issue equity. Was that good? I have no idea how to go non-capitalist. I don't even know what it means, nor does any other system in the world. So economics is about markets, gains from trade. If you can spot two people who can make a deal, that's great. If not, not. But there's no moral advance to be had by backing out of capitalism.
The question Adam Smith was trying to answer is, what is the source of a nation's wealth? And you're right. And he really was a discussion about industrialization. The physiocrats who preceded Adam Smith were actually based in France, and they actually believed that the source of wealth was the earth. And so the legacy of the French idea is that agriculture is very important, and the cap policy really favors French agriculture. Let me see what I can say about farm lifestyle and profitability of farming. First of all, in another paper I looked at, working on the farm only and not working off the farm is a relatively recent phenomenon. Many farmers worked off the farm in the off-season, so off-farm labor is actually historically much more prominent. Chayanov, in studying Russian peasants, actually noted that farmers move in and out of labor markets. Secondly, what Gary has to say about farmers becoming entrepreneurial, there's a group of farm entrepreneurs that actually run off-farm businesses, and recent data suggests there's about 800,000 jobs that they create that go to the local community. So it's not this one vision of what one farmer is. There's many different types of farmers. And the data in terms of gender, one of the things that we have to do at ERS is build much larger data sets, so we need to accumulate more data over the years asking the same question. Because again, this isn't corn, this isn't wheat or livestock, so we still have small observations, and we still need to generate statistically reliable estimates on what's going on. I can, if you send me your email, I can see what we've done. We've done some runs, but I'm not sure we can report the results yet.
I'm going to add one more thing. If I take the Midwest and the High Plains, for a lot of years, farm families have needed many jobs to support a farm household. He's working, she's working on the farm, he's working, she's working off the farm. As a matter of fact, I have argued in another paper, part of the stability that we've been able to maintain in our rural areas is the fact that many of those medium-sized farmers have lent their labor to the region, and it has resulted in a labor supply that was available for off-farm, non-farm productivity that contributed quite well to sustaining some of the rural areas. And much of that labor now is getting very old, and I'm not dealing with his issue as to who's entering farming. I'm saying that labor is getting old and it's not able to sustain itself. And so we're getting a higher rate of migration among our middle-aged to older people as a consequence.
Maybe a last comment?
Okay. When I was farming myself, Kathy, I wanted to make my entire income from my ag operation, growing cut flowers and raising raising freezer beef, local beef. And that was my goal because I thought that was purer until I had froze a greenhouse, 1 out of 3. And then I was really interested in off-farm income because it was truly risk mitigation right at the farm level. And so I'm not disagreeing with you that a family farm, a goal of a family farm is certainly ethically is let's earn the living on the farm. But in practice, over time, I'm less sure that it's economically sustainable, and that's what kept me farming in the years that I had bad years was the income that I generated from having businesses off the farm. So I understand the pain of saying and appreciate my pain of saying you need off-farm jobs because it's risk management.
Well, thank you all very much. Would you please join me in a round of applause?